This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks. You also want to eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Bedard50off and use code Bedard50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. And finally, Noterno Home Services, Greg's home comfort company. If you're looking for a team that puts your comfort first, visit noternohome.com/Bedard. 10% off your next service. You could save up to $1,000. All right. Let's start in our own backyard, Greg, before we get the Super Bowl and thoughts about that. Robert Kraft, late last week, down in New Orleans, spoke with Chad Graff of The Athletic, and he confirmed your reporting from a week ago that Josh McDaniels was 100% a Mike Vrabel hire. Kraft said that Vrabel brought McDaniels up during the interview process, quote unquote, without pause. None of this is a surprise. Can we put this to bed, and have you heard anything else since your reporting last week?
Of course we can't put it to bed, Nick, because, people have takes that they're adhering to, all that good stuff, including the, fellas I'll be on with from 2 to 6 today. People aren't going to quit it. I heard people on Twitter, already saying who believes Kraft? He's lying. All these people have heard Felger and Maz say what they've said, and they latch onto it and they think it's correct. I mean, I just don't know what else to tell people other than, I do want to point out again that when I myself went on the show 2 weeks ago and I talked about how I couldn't push back against their narrative, and in fact, looking at all the circumstances, I subscribed to it, that maybe this was an arranged marriage and all that stuff. And again, I was uninformed at the time. I admitted at the time it was an uninformed opinion, but it was just me talking about what I saw. But then I became informed, very informed, and I don't know what else to tell people other than multiple people have told me that this was sort of in the works for a while. And you could go back to our podcast from, December, where I sort of said, Vrabel could be coming with Josh McDaniels. And then I sort of walked that back a little bit. And look, it's always been there. And again, from what I could tell, I think Arthur Smith was number one on Vrabel's list, but that wasn't going to happen. Arthur Smith already had a job. So then what are you going to do? I mean, the whole Tommy Rees factor, I don't know. I that's sort of like a blind spot. Nobody brought up his name to me. I would have been surprised if it was Tommy Rees, because I just think he's a little inexperienced, and I think he's in this perfect spot with Kevin Stefanski as his offensive coordinator for a guy who calls the plays. And then he'll be ready for an OC role, or who knows, a head coach role. But I think it was McDaniels all along. Again, it was tough for them to really finalize details because I don't think Josh was just going to move anywhere due to family circumstances. So how was that going to factor in? They didn't know what jobs were going to open up. I mean, if they knew 2 months ago that Mayo was getting fired, then it probably would have been more on solid ground. But all of this happened so fast that, I don't think the Krafts imposed their will. Vrabel had his pick of jobs. He wasn't going to be saddled with an offensive coordinator that he didn't want. I think the McDaniels QB development factor is huge in all of this and was paramount in Mike Vrabel's mind. And so, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say Josh McDaniels was the best guy at the end of the day.
All right, I'm moving on. Let's move on. The Patriots are moving on from Chukwuma Okorafor. He was officially released by the team. I just got one question for you, Greg, regarding Okorafor. I remember when he decided to leave, I guess we would say. Phil Perry had mentioned it was kind of a mental health situation. Without prying too much, do we have any idea what happened last year? Was it just Okorafor didn't like the staff didn't like Okorafor, he didn't like moving to the left side? Like, what the hell happened with him last year? Where did it go so bad so quick?
It's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think it could be, I was having an interesting, sort of text discussion with a team source during the Super Bowl and things like that. And I found, because we were talking about he was sort of blowing me and also the Chiefs about Kingsley Suamataia,
Yeah.
who didn't play in the Super Bowl. And I answered back with Chooks, and he said both got benched. And I said one quit, and he said allegedly. So
Oh,
I don't know what that means. I mean, you could probably make more of it than I do. I'm not that bright. But if I had to guess, um, I don't think that Chooks really liked Scott Peters' coaching or strike zone. I've heard that there were multiple players who weren't happy about his quote unquote system and how it didn't fit them. And, that could have factored into everything.
in other news, the Patriots keeping somebody in town for a couple of more years. Jeremiah Pharms signs a 2-year extension. Greg, when you look at this defensive line, and we'll talk about this more in a minute. I know you've got some thoughts on the Patriots and their priority this offseason, priority number one. We'll get to that. But first, just your thoughts in a vacuum about Jeremiah Pharms and him staying here for a couple more years.
I like it. I thought, I haven't done my, now that we're finally through the Super Bowl and putting the staff together and all that stuff, I sort of have time to regroup and sort of finish off my grading from the system, including the last game. I did watch, Joe Milton's film, which was very impressive. But, just off the top of my head, I thought Jeremiah Pharms had a couple of games that he was in my top 3. So, a little undersized, but I think he has the ability to fit sort of, this is going to be more of a gap penetrating scheme than what we're used to in New England. And I think that's going to fit him well. And I think he's been a good, productive player here. And I look forward to that. I mean, it's a good depth signing.
Another guy for depth, I just want to bring this up for a second, just kind of stick a pin in this. Who knows what's going to happen moving forward. But I thought Jaquelin Roy showed up a few times last year before he got injured. I think he's an interesting guy as well. Again, as a depth piece more than anything else. But with Pharms and with Roy, you might have something there with those guys. And that's how you start to build depth. They're not going to sit there and, jump out at you all the time. But to have a couple of younger guys for depth purposes on this defensive line, it's pretty important. With that said, have you heard anything, Greg? I just kind of noted this a second ago. Have you heard anything about the trenches this offseason, especially coming off that Super Bowl on Sunday night where obviously the Eagles, it was all about the trenches?
Yeah, I think this was even before the Eagles Super Bowl. I think, now that the coaching staff and the scouting staff, well, the scouting staff's been doing it the whole time, since most of the group outside of Ryan Cowden has been here the entire time. But, what they're doing right now is they're all in the building. They're reviewing last year. They're evaluating players. They're trying to set the scheme for next year, what they're going to do, what they need, all that stuff. And from what I've been told from a couple of different people is that even before the Super Bowl the other night, that the two lines, the offensive and defensive lines, are going to be the top priority this offseason. I mean, I think they look at it and it makes sense. And I agree with it. Of course, everybody knows I agree with it. That you have to have the foundation, and that's the offensive line on offense. It's the defensive line. If you're not right there, if you're getting pushed around like we saw with the Chiefs the other night, especially with their offensive line, you have no shot. It doesn't matter who your quarterback is. It doesn't matter what you have for weapons. It doesn't matter. And both of these groups have been neglected for so long. And again, this goes back to Bill Belichick when you and I were railing on they got to go get tackles. How long are you going to rely on Trent Brown? Like, you need to get a replacement for David Andrews. Like, what about, Joe Tooney and all that stuff? And, the guys up front, Devon Gottschall's like really the only nose tackle. And, Barmore's really the only playmaker up there. And you got Keon White, but what do you got on the other side? And Josh Uche goes out the door. Anthony Jennings is nice, but, from what I understand, the two lines are going to be the priority. I don't think people are going to be happy about it. I don't think radio is going to like it and all that stuff, but boo freaking who? That's how you build a team. Look at the Eagles. Look at what they've done. 2 Super Bowl appearances in 3 years. They destroy the Chiefs on Sunday. And why is it? It's because they completely owned both lines of scrimmage.
From the inside out, a couple things. Let's not forget Vrabel's introductory press conference. One of the first things he said was, we got to protect our quarterback. We got to protect Drake May, right? Got to protect Drake May, and we have to, I forget if he said affect or impact the opposing quarterback. So that tells you. And Vrabel also said a lot about the offensive line during that introductory press conference. He's been pretty consistent about this. So I think that's exactly what this team is going to do. They're going to go out there. They're going to put a lot of emphasis on offensive and defensive line and start building at the trenches and then build out. Just go from there. Protect Drake May. Get after the other quarterback. That's the goal. And just, Belichick's, look, I don't want to go too far through this all, but honestly, and I know last year people will kill Elliott Wolf, and I get it. The plan didn't work. The injuries didn't help. Okorafor situation didn't help. But we're talking about sustained ignorance on the offensive line from Bill Belichick. And, the Joe Thuney, the Shaq Mason stuff, even Ted Karras. I think they drafted one offensive lineman in the top 100 from like Isaiah Wynn through Cole Strange. It was just absolutely ridiculous. And this is why you saw what you saw last year. You can't rebuild that thing in one season. All right, before we get to Patrick Mahomes, Chiefs, Patriots, Brady, all that discussion, let's first get to the Prize Picks discussion with Greg.
Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Love sitting down for a game, no matter what sport. Was doing it on Sunday with Chiefs, Eagles. I didn't hit on everything, but it was fun, and I have a blast following along. You should too. All-Star Weekend is almost here, and Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching your favorite players during the game and the Saturday night events like the 3-point contest. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select players' projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. Think Steph Curry will get more than 5 3-pointers next week. Giannis for more than 35 points. Cook up hot takes with your friends like Nick Cattles.
Yeah.
And real money this basketball season when you run your crew. Run your game on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
Greg, do too many people put too much significance on the Super Bowl?
I don't know how you feel about it, Nick, but yes, I think so. And I understand it's the big game. And I understand that there's a lot of attention. And I understand all the media's there all week and doing all these interviews and talking about the game. But, you hear this discussion. And look, I agreed with – we heard the same sort of discussion with Patriots fans when, there was an argument about, so Tom Brady got 3 Super Bowl titles pretty quickly in his career.
Yeah.
And Patriots fans wanted him in the discussion with Joe Montana, and people were pushing back because Joe Montana was 4-0 in Super Bowls and had the 4 titles. And, you can't say that about Brady, and this went on and on until he finally got his 4th in 2014. I mean, there was a 10-year span where he didn't get a Super Bowl title. And, some people wanted to say that Brady didn't deserve to be in the discussion because Montana was 4-0 in Super Bowls. And I agreed with Patriots fans. I was on their side where I thought that line of discussion was utterly ridiculous because, wait, you're saying so Joe Montana doesn't get into any more Super Bowls, but Brady's been to, I don't know, at the time, 6 or 7. And, just because he lost to the Giants twice. Like all of a sudden he's lesser than Joe Montana. Like, getting there and getting to the conference championship games, like that pales in comparison to Joe Montana when he only went to 4 Super Bowls. Like I just didn't get that discussion. And I also don't get it about Patrick Mahomes. This is a guy who's, in his 7th season, he's never failed to make it less than the conference championship game. He's lost 2 Super Bowls against number 1 defenses. And yeah, they were somewhat lopsided, but to me, that doesn't matter. I mean, what's the difference between, and I know the scores were quote unquote closer, but we all know the game. I mean, whether it was, the Broncos in an early AFC championship game or the Jets game at home, or the Ravens divisional round game when the Ravens ran all over the Patriots. I don't see the difference between those games and Patrick Mahomes losing to a great Bucs defense, a great Eagles defense, and struggling. I just don't get that whole line of discussion. Just because it's a Super Bowl doesn't mean it's has like that much more added significance when we're talking about when you're evaluating a player and how great they are. I mean, Tom Brady was on the same level as Joe Montana, even though he had 1 less Super Bowl title. Patrick Mahomes, like the only way, like going into this week, and we talked about it last week, like if he got 3 straight, then you could say, okay, he joins the conversation because that's something nobody's ever done. And that would be his 4th Super Bowl title already in 7 seasons. And now you're like, all right, now he joins the discussion if he does that. He didn't do it. That doesn't mean all of a sudden he goes back to being some crap bag. I mean, it's still Brady and he's below, but I don't know. I just think it's ridiculous how much people put emphasis on a Super Bowl when your season ends when your season ends. If you crap out in the divisional round, I think it's worse than the Super Bowl.
I have roughly 777 thoughts on this. So I'm going to try to just hone it in as best as I can. I look at it from the big picture. Okay. I have no issue with people debating which stretch was better. Was Brady's stretch with the Patriots from 16 to 18 or whatever the hell it was, that 3-year stretch when he was 39 years old to 41 years old, and he went to 3 Super Bowls and he won 2 out of 3. And the only one that he lost, he threw for over 500 yards, which is a record, and had 3 touchdowns and 0 picks. I have no problem with debating that stretch versus this stretch by Mahomes, where he went to 3 straight and won 2 out of the 3 and got absolutely smoked. I mean, slightly lopsided, I think, is a very nice way that you put it. They got their asses handed to them on Sunday night. That was a demolition. So I have no problem with the stretch conversation. I have no problem. I stole it from you. As a matter of fact, Greg, I hosted on 98.5 on Sunday, and I stole the whole.
I heard you.
I stole the whole.
I was driving around and I heard it.
The prime conversation. I have no problem with debating, okay, what did these guys look like during their prime? The GOAT conversation was outrageous. It was out. It should not have even been a conversation in my mind. People can do what they do. They can cover it the way they want to cover it. It's their world. If they want to talk about that, that's their right. I mean, I'm not a king here. I'm not telling you that nobody can talk about. Everybody can talk about it if they'd like. Me personally, it was outrageous. So I just kind of look at this through 21 playoff games. Through 21 playoff games, Patrick Mahomes is 17-4. Brady was 16-5. Pretty damn close. I would also add that the biggest issue that I have, Greg, and I don't know how you feel about it, I'll ask you. The GOAT conversations, to me, I understand why we do it, but it's so difficult when you're talking about how sports evolve and how they change. And I'll just give you one simple example. Patrick Mahomes, over the last couple of years, trying to remember when that rule changed, but now the 1 seed is the only team that gets the bye. So when you're Kansas City and you're the 1 seed, that's a whole different world, right? Because even when Brady was the 1 seed for a lot of his run, the 2 seed had the bye as well. So you still had an equally rested team going against you inevitably if things fell chalk in the AFC Championship game. That's not the case anymore. The Chiefs had 20 plus days of rest before the playoffs this year. So, I mean, we can get into so many different conversations about, how it breaks down, the rules, how they're called, how the game is called now, all of that stuff. And so to me, it's like, I get it. I went through it with LeBron and Michael Jordan. It's the same kind of thing with me. People were way too premature about anointing LeBron the greatest of all time. I think people have been way too premature anointing Patrick Mahomes as the GOAT or close to the GOAT. Stephen A. Smith said that if Patrick won on Sunday, he's the GOAT, no question. Austin Mock
Really?
from The Athletic. Yeah, Austin Mock from The Athletic. People can Google this. Go The Athletic over the weekend. Austin Mock wrote that if Patrick Mahomes won against the Eagles, that the case was closed, he's the GOAT, and it's not even necessarily close. I think that's the kind of stuff that irritates people because it's unreasonable. It's ridiculous. And we don't know. Look, one last thing before I kick it to you, back to you, about the GOAT thing. One thing that we don't know, and this is why I think it's just way too premature. We don't know what's going to happen the next 5 years, the next 10 years. Like, what if Mahomes is starting his decline? His last 2 seasons statistically have been his worst. Now, yes, you can look at talent, but you could also look at, will he stay in shape? Will his athleticism start to erode? We don't know what, like, this could have been his last chance to win a Super Bowl in the next 5, 6, 7 years. And I had a caller when I was talking about the prime thing that you brought up in Boston Sports Journal. I thought the caller nailed it. I remember his name because it was such a good call. Eric from Texas. And he nailed it. He compared it to Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus and said, when Tiger Woods ran through golf and he was like one major away from Jack, everybody was like, Tiger's the greatest of all time. And then Tiger's world crumbled. I'm not saying Mahomes' will, but he still has a lot to do to gain as far as GOAT goes. And we just don't know the future, Greg.
Yeah. I mean, my only point about the whole discussion in last week, and I did think that, because of Brady's longevity and how he has 7 Super Bowl titles, like that was a ways off to Mahomes to really have a chance. And so to me, the more pertinent thing was, if he won 3 straight, like let's look at their primes and who would you take? And I think both of us agreed that we would take Mahomes because of the athletic ability that he represents, that everything else is so close with those guys, the intangibles, the comebacks, the clutch play, like all that stuff is so close. Like, I mean, it's basically the same. And, I would just go with the guy with a little bit better athletic ability. We don't even know how long he's going to sustain that. He could turn into Brady and be a pocket quarterback in 5 years, especially if he suffers some sort of injury. But, my big thing about the whole discussion was, the only way Mahomes even entered the conversation to being like GOAT adjacent was if he did something that nobody else has done. And that would have been 3 straight Super Bowl titles and 4 in, I think it was 6 years or 4 and 7 years. Then you would have been like, okay, but it would have been very, like you said, very similar to Tiger Woods. And like, I don't think it was wrong to put Tiger in the hemisphere of Jack Nicklaus, who was my favorite. But ultimately, like, you're right. Like, I thought it was ridiculous to say Tiger's the greatest of all time when he hadn't passed Jack yet. And I would have said the same thing. I would have been like, Mahomes is there on that level, but he's not where Brady is yet. That's even if he won and then he lost. And so, but I disregard, like I heard Felger yesterday saying like, well, if he could have gained this in this game, then he's got to lose. No, like, you're here. If you win and do something somebody else isn't, like, you're still on the same level. And so I don't think Mahomes lost anything on Sunday. I know I'm certain, and I've heard this, Patriots fans will glob on to the whole blowout thing, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But, I still think I still think he's there. He can get there. Whether he does or not, we'll see.
Was Philadelphia much better than people gave them credit for being?
That was my conclusion watching this game and sort of, doing some research, and I'm still in the process of it because, I asked my buddy Aaron Schatz over at FTN, the DVOA guru, to give me some numbers because since they moved from Football Outsiders to FTN, they're limited on it. Like, they only go back to like 2020, but of course he has all the numbers. I'll just readily admit this was a blind spot for me. I think anybody who listens to this podcast knows that I don't really watch the NFL during the NFL season. Like, I'm singularly focused on the Patriots, and I might catch the stray Thursday night game, or maybe get home for the second half of Sunday Night Football, or watch a little bit of the playoffs. But I'm not really watching the league all year, and so I didn't realize how good the Eagles were, and I think. What really brought it home for me was I was listening to Chris Sims' sort of Super Bowl recap, and he picked the Eagles by 10 in that game. And he said, and he watches the whole league. He watches a lot of film. So these are the guys that I rely on to sort of fill me in on how good, whether it's him or Greg Cosell. These are the guys that I listen to get a clue on the rest of the league. And he said, if you put together a 22-man all-star team at every position from this game, that the Eagles would have about 18 of the 22 positions. Probably you would go with Mahomes, Chris Jones, Trent McDuffie, and one of the guards, either Joe Tooney or Trey Smith for the Chiefs. Other than that, you would take all Eagles. And, you factor in the Vic Fangio factor, and I think people really slept on how good this team was. And the Super Bowl brought it home for me. I was just like, holy crap. This is an Eagles team that also destroyed the Commanders in the conference championship game. This is an Eagles team that I'm just trying to find. So they were, since the bye week, they were 15-1. They were 2-2 at the bye. That's sort of the Eagles team that I remember. Maybe I saw them earlier. The Eagles were 16-1 since their bye week. They had a plus 238 point margin in those games. They were a plus 28 turnover margin. I think they were a plus 14 maybe plus 12 turnover margin in the postseason alone. Just to give you context on the point margin of of plus 238, I think the 2007 Patriots in the regular season were plus 315. This Eagles team won, since in that 17 games, they won 9 games by double digits, 5 games by 20 plus points. They entered this game. They finished the year with the number 1 DVOA defense. And since about week 6, when Fangio's new scheme really started to take hold, Aaron Schatz told me like that defense was ridiculous. Down the stretch in the final 17 games, or what have you. And then you factor in on offense, the offensive line. You factor in Saquon Barkley, and I think that was the biggest factor in this as far as the Eagles' offense against the Chiefs' defense, is that the Chiefs had to stop. They had to sell it to stop the run, or else they never would have gotten off the field. That's the way Spags, looked at it. And so at times that left Eagles receivers one-on-one, and credit to Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Dotson and all these guys for executing. But you're going one-on-one. If you looked at a spray chart for Jalen Hurts, it's all along the sidelines. It's all deep. He either went back shoulder or deep. They picked on 35, the other cornerback, who couldn't keep up. And like, this Eagles team, once the Chiefs fell behind, they were unstoppable. And to me, I think the story of this game is not about Patrick Mahomes and not about how he played. It's a little bit, on Andy Reid. I thought Spags was fine in this game. It was just the score got away from him. But to me, the story of this game, and I think, given time and context, I think people will come up to it, is how good this Eagles team was. I think too many people, including myself, slept on them. This was, and I'm going through the numbers, but according to Schatz's numbers, especially the way the Eagles finished this season, you're talking about a top 10 Super Bowl team that this Eagles team was, and I don't think they got enough respect coming into this game.
Damn good football team. I find it interesting that even Vegas had Kansas City as the favorites, minus 1.5. Usually Vegas knows, right? So Vegas didn't think the Eagles were that much better than the Chiefs. So there are a lot of thoughts here. Again, the Eagles are really good. And when I looked at this game, and I was wrong, I raised my hand. I had the Chiefs winning. I thought it was going to be a close, great game. Wrong, riggedy wrong, right? Totally wrong. But I would say that I looked at this and I had mentioned that 18 straight playoff games, Kansas City did not give up a 100-yard rusher. I didn't think Barkley was going to have a big game, and he didn't. They just absolutely snuffed out Barkley. And so my thought process was, okay, now you got McDuffie versus A.J. Brown. Not a bad matchup. And it's going to be on Jalen Hurts. And so, Hurts played as well as he played a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl against Kansas City. So I think maybe looking at Hurts, that was kind of the thing that people overlooked, is that he could have been as effective as he was, like he was a couple of years ago, and he would be able to do it again versus Steve Spagnuolo. Because frankly, since week 5, Greg, you mentioned it. Yeah, they've been 16-1, but don't get it twisted. They didn't ask Jalen Hurts to do a lot. Their passing offense was very, very conservative. Their offense was led by Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts' legs. They were a run-first football team. This is the first team since I think it was 1975 to win a Super Bowl that had more rushing yards than passing yards through the season, including the playoffs. This hasn't happened in almost 50 years, this type of offense, okay? So I do think, defensively, they're awesome. Offensive line is awesome. It really came down to Jalen Hurts. As far as, looking at this Eagles team and other teams and teams that Brady faced, I feel the same way about that as I felt about, the GOAT conversation and how teams evolve and things happen. Like, the game is played differently. I would say that Mahomes was atrocious on Sunday night. Yes, there was pressure, and there was lots of pressure. In the first half, the pressure was near 52%. I get it. Tom Brady against the Giants back in 2007 was pressured more than 43% of the time. And that was a 3-point game. So, yes, we've seen great quarterbacks, including Brady, be impacted by the pass rush. But Brady never looked that bad in a big game as far as the Super Bowl, the biggest game, right? He looked bad. He had some stinkers in the playoffs. People forget about those. But, when you look at it, I thought Mahomes was off from the very beginning of the game. He had Travis Kelce wide open, I think, on the first drive for a third down. He threw it well behind him. He had Kelce open again in a little sit-down route at the chains, and he threw it at his feet. I thought Mahomes all night was erratic until the end when it was garbage time. I thought he was firing the ball all over the place. And Brady mentioned this early. His feet, like out of the gate, we talked about this with Drake May. Mahomes' feet, he was tap dancing in the pocket immediately. And so I don't think he went into that game feeling great about his offensive line, and he just didn't play well. It's as simple as that. You give a lot of credit to the Eagles, but when plays were there, he had Worthy open early in the game for a big play and just didn't throw the football. He missed them. So I do think there were some opportunities early in that game to keep it close, and Mahomes shit his pants. We could just be honest about it. He shit his pants. It's fine. Doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback. Doesn't mean he's crap. Doesn't mean the Chiefs are crap. Doesn't mean he's not going to end up being one of the best of all time. On Sunday night, he crapped his pants. And I think we all saw it. Even when he had time, even when he could deliver the football, he was not the same guy.
I just disagree. I've been consistent on this for years. People know from either the pod or the radio that I am a big believer in pressure rates on quarterbacks. That anything over 40, you start getting in the danger zone. Over 50, forget it. And I was looking at the pressure rates in their career among Mahomes and Brady, and it's pretty consistent. Brady was, and when he was pressured 45.7% of the time or more, he lost 6 of 9 games. Okay. Patrick Mahomes, and I couldn't find that. Patrick Mahomes, he lost 1, 2, 3, 4. He was 4 of 8 in games with the same sort of pressure rate. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl was 55.4%. This game, like you said, with this game when it was in the balance, was 53. And this started from the get-go. Like when you're and this was the same thing with Brady. And I used to excuse Brady, whether it was the Giants Super Bowls or what. I would excuse it, be like, what do you want him to do? There's too much pressure. And
is there a difference between though, Greg? See, what I have a beef with here is I don't disagree with you. Pressure rate affects teams, affects offenses, affects quarterbacks. My problem is Brady wasn't humiliated like often. And it's not just losing the game. It's the fact that there are levels to this. And Mahomes was humiliated. Like he was atrocious. And you can look at the Super Bowl against the Giants where Brady wasn't atrocious. He wasn't great, but he wasn't that bad. And I think people are looking at it and saying, like, for example, Sunday night was Mahomes' second worst career start. When you look at QBR, you could argue that was literally his second worst game of his career. And so I just think there are levels to the idea of, do you get beat or, do you keep it competitive? And I think Brady didn't always have this. And again, this is the longevity thing. Mahomes will play more football games and we'll see how it ends up. But Brady, when you're talking especially Super Bowls, Jeff Howe tweeted earlier this week or over the weekend, Brady walked off the field in the fourth quarter overtime in all 10 Super Bowls with a lead. So he had the ability to kind of just find a way to keep his offense and his team in the game. And Mahomes has not shown that the two times where he faced major adversity in the biggest game.
I just think it similar to what you said about comparing different eras. I just don't think you can. I just don't think you can compare. I mean, how can you compare Eli Manning going up against if he went up against this Eagles offense or a great offense in the Super Bowl? He might have gotten waxed. He just didn't. He faced Eli Manning twice, with limited weapons. Very conservative offenses. He faced Jake Delhomme. He lost to Nick Foles. I mean, just because, again, this is the Super Bowl discussion. Just because it happened, and just because it was closer or whatever, to me, that's more about how the Patriots were constructed. I mean, you get these type of games and I thought Mahomes played really well in the Bucs Super Bowl, where he faced the highest pressure rate of his career when he was on, he had a hurt foot. You get blowouts when you can't block the sustained pressure, and there's no answers. At least Tom Brady had James White to dump off to in the Atlanta Super Bowl like 37 times, or Julian Edelman. Like Mahomes doesn't have any of those guys.
So Chiefs aren't a good football team, is what you're telling us. They're just not a good. They're not a good football team. I mean, if we're
not against one of the great top 10 Super Bowl teams of all time. I mean, nobody's going to stack up those Giants teams against any of these Super Bowl teams. Like they were bad teams. I mean, I think those Eagles. Those Giants teams like had a plus, like one was a -6 for the season. One was like a +22. I mean, to me, it's apples and oranges. You're talking about Mahomes got blasted by two teams that finished number 1 overall DVOA. And because he got blown out, you're saying that Tom Brady's better? Maybe just Belichick's better. He had, better weapons around him, whether it was Welker or Edelman or James White. Like, I just don't subscribe to that.
I understand what you're saying. Big picture, I don't necessarily disagree that the Eagles and Bucs were great football teams, or at least great defenses. But again, we're looking at different seasons. Like we're looking at different, in some cases, eras. We're looking at different strengths of schedule. We're looking at
Nick. How can you compare what happened on Sunday to 2007 and the Giants, saying like, well, Tom Brady lost by 3? Yeah, without factoring in, it's Eli Manning with David Tyree and a running game. Right. I mean, how can you compare the two?
Because again, we're talking about all-time great quarterbacks facing horrendous pressure in the Super Bowl. That's how I can compare it. Mahomes shit his pants. Brady didn't. And I would also say
Brady never faced anything like that in the Super Bowl.
Okay, again, 38% pressure on Sunday night. We could talk about garbage time. One of the garbage times was one single pass. So I don't know about dropbacks and pressure rate according to dropbacks. I saw Mahomes pressured pretty much through 3 quarters. And I saw Brady pressured throughout the entire football game against the Giants because it was a close game. So are we going to sit there and say, well, Mahomes faced a lot of pressure in 3 quarters, but Brady faced a lot of pressure in 4 quarters? We can have this tit for tat. My point is Mahomes was god-awful in the Super Bowl.
Why? You think he just sucked because of the stage? It was because of the pressure. It was there from the get-go. Joe Tooney couldn't block anybody.
Did Brady suck in 07? Did Brady suck in that Super Bowl? No. But
the Giants were running away from him. He wasn't down 24 points at halftime. If he faced a real offense, he might have.
Pressure is pressure, Greg. It's 44% versus 38%. Brady faced
but when you're not trailing, when you're going against an offense where you know they're not going to run away from you, then you can play a certain way. You could check it down. You could turf it. You could throw it away. You could take sacks. But when you're facing, Jalen Hurts and his running and throwing and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Saquon Barkley and a great offensive line.
I'm hearing a lot of excuses from you.
This is the same stuff I used to say about Brady when he was, the Jets would make him look terrible.
As far as the Chiefs situation, I'm hearing a ton of excuses for Patrick Mahomes. That's what I'm hearing. A team that went what? They had 1 or 2 losses this year, the entire year. Did they have 1 loss, 2 losses? A team that went through the AFC, a team that just beat the Buffalo Bills, a team that has one of the best quarterbacks of all time, a team that has an offensive line that has at least 2 Pro Bowlers on it. All of a sudden, Andy Reid is supposed to be one of the great offensive minds in football in the history of the game. Steve Spagnuolo is supposed to be one of the greatest defensive coordinators. But now all of a sudden, because the Eagles had a great game, they had an unbelievable game. But now all of a sudden, I'm supposed to sit here and cry for Patrick Mahomes because he doesn't have enough talent and this and that. How about when Brady was taken?
Just state Super Bowls are football. Football is the greatest team sport, and they don't win just because of quarterbacks. They don't win, and they don't lose just because of quarterbacks. Everybody knows. Everybody watched the game. They didn't have to blitz once when you can rush with 4 and get pressure 53% of the time, and sack the quarterback 6 times. No quarterback's doing anything.
The Giants rushed 4, the NASCAR package, throughout the game in 07, and Brady did not look nearly as bad as Mahomes looked. And I would also add this.
Wrong.
If you're gonna argue, okay, you think Brady looked as bad as Mahomes on Sunday night in 07? I think you're crazy. I think you're nuts. Mahomes, they had 33 total yards in the first half. They were completely incompetent, Greg. Now you're reaching. I mean, we can disagree. We can agree to disagree, but now that you're reaching, telling me that Brady looked as bad in 07 as Mahomes looked on Sunday night. That's certifiably nuts. You might want to run that back and think about that maybe over the next couple days and renege when we talk later in the week. Four-man rush, 43%, 38%. So what are we doing here? And I would also add this. Greg, you can't tell me that you would take Patrick Mahomes in his prime over Brady because of his athleticism, because that's a weapon Brady didn't have. So we can sit here and we can talk about, Mahomes faced a lot of pressure. He did. There's no doubt. They both faced tons of pressure in the biggest game of the season. Brady doesn't run. Brady doesn't have the athleticism. Brady didn't even have as good of an arm as Mahomes, even in 07. So if we're going to sit there and we're going to talk about, and I have no problem with it because I agree with you. If we're going to sit there and talk about Mahomes having athleticism and having more raw talent and this and that, blah, 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 then he should have been able to use that, elevate his own play and elevate the players around him like Brady did in years like 06 when he was throwing the football to absolutely nobody, like he did in 2018 before they ran the football a ton and it had to get the most out of that football team. Like we're acting as if Brady didn't make deep runs in the playoffs with less than what Mahomes had this year. Again, if we're going to go tit for tat.
The guy ended up in the Super Bowl. I mean, Tom Brady in the first half against the Giants was 8 of 14 for 82 yards, 3 sacks. And, if he was going up against a real offense.
Still better than Mahomes. And what did he do in the second half? We're nitpicking the first. What did he do in the second half? Again, the Chiefs had 33 yards in the first half. 33. Tom Brady had more than twice the yards that the Chiefs had as a total team in that Super Bowl.
Yeah, because Andy Reid got out-coached. Vic Fangio had a much better scheme. They didn't let Patrick Mahomes escape. Their bull rushing of the ends, driving them back, and keeping. No,
it was everybody else's fault.
This is the same stuff that I used to say when Tom Brady used to lose Super Bowls when pressure was. I mean, it's not on him.
We got to move on.
He needed to do a better job.
He never looked that bad, Greg. If he looked that bad, I'd be with you. And I'd say, yeah, I remember in '07 when he got pressured a ton by the Giants and he couldn't complete a pass and he looked like he was frantic in the pocket. He looked like he was absolutely lost. I would sit here and agree with you on that.
You mean like the Jets game?
What, back in what the hell year was that?
Or was that 2010?
Yeah, again.
Round game?
And what did I say? I said that when we're comparing these guys, we're looking at longevity for Brady. Like Brady, that's Brady's 10th year. So like, if we look at Brady started his career 10-0 in the playoffs. 10-0.
All right. Listen, we're getting off field now. Let me read this read because I got to go. As someone who spent years covering football, I know what it takes to be a winning team. It's about reliability, precision, and showing up when it matters most. When it comes to my own home and my heating system, I need a team I can count on when Naterno Home Services delivered. Naterno is local. They are family-owned and family-focused and have been servicing the greater Boston area for 15 years. From start to finish, they made the process of upgrading my heating system seamless and stress-free. They go above and beyond. Who provides that kind of service? Naterno does. Naterno isn't just about heating. They're my go-to for plumbing, cooling, and even water and air quality solution. They've got the expertise to handle whatever your home needs. Here's the best part. You can get 10% off your next service with Naterno. That could save you up to $1,000 on your next project. Just visit naternohome.com/Bedard. That NOTTURNO home.com/Bedard. Take advantage now. These deals won't last forever. If you're looking for a team that puts your comfort first, visit naternohome.com/Bedard. I trust Naterno. You should too.
All right, Greg's going to run in a minute. Let me remind you, BSJ, $50 for the year. Bedard Giardi doing a great job with Patriot stuff. Huge offseason this offseason. Download the Prize Picks app today as well. Use that code CLNS, $50 instantly when you play 5. And you want to eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Bedard50 off. Use code Bedard50 off. Get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. We'll just wrap it up here, Greg. Jalen Hurts. Where does he rank for you among NFL quarterbacks?
So I did this last night on TV. I have Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Lamar, Stafford, Daniels, Herbert. Some people will probably push back on that. I just think Justin Herbert, we've talked about this before. I just think he's been a victim of circumstances, and the Chargers, I don't think they're very talented. I think he finally has the right coach and they're getting there. But I mean, if you put Justin Hurts on the Eagles, I don't think that the outcome is any difference. And then I have Hurts.
Yeah, Hurts for me is around 6 or 7. I would not put Herbert before him because Herbert's just been bad in the playoffs. So bad in the playoffs that I just can't overlook it. And so I would put Hurts probably ahead of Herbert. I do think Herbert is most likely the more like, how do I put this, like talented quarterback. But again, man, oh man, he's been bad in the bigger games. So, but Mahomes and Allen and Burrow and Lamar, those guys are absolutely ahead of him. I think you could make the argument for Stafford and others. I'm probably forgetting people this off the top of my head, but I would probably put him 6 or 7. All right. I had fun. I love when me and the big boy go back and forth a little bit. He's going to go to Felger, Mass, so I'm sure it'll get just worse for him today. Everybody, enjoy the next few days. We'll be back later in the week, and we'll talk more Patriots. Until then, bye-bye.